always a delight to introduce our speakers, but probably is a bit of a special delight in that our next two speakers are both people that work at Simpson House. I'm really pleased to introduce Sarah Loeb and Jane Edwards, who are going to make the next presentation. You have people experience here in terms of counsellors, but also in terms of training as well. And the obvious plug, this links with Sarah is our trainer on the COSCA certificate that I was talking about earlier, that specialises on looking at addictions and working with substance dependency and recovery. So with any more ado, I'm really glad to hand over to Sarah and to Jane. I think it'll probably add quite a contrast with our previous speaker. Mark's still with us at the back of the room, and I look forward to Mark joining in later, probably with our questions and with the debate section as well. So welcome, Sarah and Jane. Over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
So over to you.
Okay. Well, what we're going to look at in the next wee bit is how to work effectively with substance users. And I just want to say before we start that I'm going to ask you as the audience to participate a little bit. The first question is just a show of hands, and then later on I'll ask you to think about your own dependencies to help underlie some of the points that we're making. But just to say that there are people watching at home and they can see you, but you can't see them. So just think about that before you make any responses, just to make you aware of that. Okay, so I'm going to kick off and ask you a question to start with. And what I'd like you to think is, as an individual worker, or if you're not a worker, just as an individual, what do you think is most effective when you think about working with substance using clients? Now, don't shout out, just think about where your mind goes to. I want you to raise your hands if your mind went to a particular technique, like smart recovery, REBT, CBT, person-centred counselling, psychodynamic counselling, motivational interviewing. So if your mind went to a technique or a way of working or a particular approach, it doesn't matter what the approach was. Can you stick your hand up, please? So just a couple of people. Okay, if your mind went to the relationship between the client and the counsellor, can you stick your hand up? Well, I'm preaching to the converted. We can go home now. Well, it's great that you say that, because actually our experience as supervisors and what research tends to show is the opposite. It tends to show, if you ask, if we move slides, if you ask therapists what they think is most effective when working with substance using clients, therapists attribute their success to their particular technique. So rather than thinking it's about the relationship, therapists tend to, most of the time, think it's because I used REBT or because I'm a CBT therapist. It's not about how I am with the client. But if you ask clients, clients think the opposite. What clients will say is, if my treatment was effective, I put it down to the fact that my therapist was empathetic and understanding with me. And that's research constantly shows that clients and therapists think very differently about what works, and what is really important to the clients is how the therapist is with them. Now, it's brilliant that you all raised your hands, but my experience, and I'll put myself on the line here, is that sometimes that can feel really simplistic. And often it feels simplistic when we've got like a really challenging case, or something feels very, very difficult to work with. I think sometimes we can get a bit techniquey, which means that we can think about, I want to use this technique or that technique, or I'm feeling lost, what can I do? What can I try on my client? As opposed to just stopping and really listening to what the client's saying. And I think we know this, but it's difficult to remember it when things are challenging. So in this presentation, what we're wanting to look at is ways of working effectively with clients. And before we look at that, as a way of underlining what I want to say, I'd like you all to consider your own dependencies. So what I'd like you to do is to think about something that you do or you have on a regular basis and on which you're dependent. Now, this can relate to anything. It can relate to objects, people, activities. In fact, anything you would miss if it was no longer around tomorrow. But I want to take it a step further, and I want to be a wee bit mean. And I want you to think about something that really, really matters to you. Something that is so important to you, you'd be pretty devastated if it went tomorrow. When I'm doing training, people usually think about partners, their children, their family, or it could be exercise, or it could be chocolate. It could be something that you really, really rely on, and if you didn't have it tomorrow, that it would be extremely hard for you. It would be hard to carry on. So if you could just get something like that in your heads. And now what I want you to take a few minutes to do, I'm not going to necessarily ask you what your dependency is. If you want to share it, you can, but you don't need to. What I'd like you to do is think about why you need your dependency, what it does for you, and how it helps you. So I want you just to take a few moments thinking about how your dependency helps you and what it does for you. Smartphone. You like your smartphone. What does your smartphone do for you? You'd be lost without it. Pardon? It's like your right arm. So how does it make you feel? How does it help you?
I can check my email, I can check, I can update my Facebook, I can contact people, I've got names, addresses. There's a lot of information in there that we didn't have in days gone by, but if I'm looking for a place and I don't know where it is, I can hit my sat-nav on it. It does. It's
it really
indispensable.
Does help you. So it's irreplaceable.
Yes, it is.
So why is it so important to you being able to check, all of these things that you do, how does that help you? How does that make you feel?
It empowers me to find places and get in touch with people.
Okay.
And we never had that opportunity. I've grown up in an era when we didn't even have a telephone in the house. So, I've tried to find places without a sat-nav, and you used to always look for phone boxes to find if you were still on the correct road and things like that.
Okay, so it empowers you, it helps
Absolutely.
you feel in touch, and it sounds like it keeps you in control of things and where you're going.
It can do.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody else want to say what their dependency does or how it might help? Yeah?
Chocolate.
Great, that's one of mine too, yeah.
So comforts
you,
soothes, fills me up,
fills you up,
just makes me feel good.
It makes you feel
There's something in the taste of it that just is pleasurable.
Grand. Okay, so it comforts you, it soothes you, it fills you up, and it tastes good. It makes you, and it soothes you. Thank you.
And it's I've noticed that maybe if I've had a difficult day at work, I'll feel more like having chocolate. So there's something about, the sort of dealing with stress or something like that as well.
So something about helping you cope with difficult times, soothing you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, thanks.
Mine is similar. It's broader than chocolate. Mine is any carbohydrate. Chips, potatoes, pasta. And it's when I'm unhappy and anxious. And to be honest, it doesn't do anything for me, but I do it anyway. I just keep stuffing things into my mouth. Hence why I'm on a carb-free diet at the moment. But I find it very difficult. And do you want the rest of the questions?
Well, just stick with this one just now, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's definitely what I'm dependent on.
Okay, but it's interesting that when you're feeling low or when you're feeling things are hard, you turn to your dependency, you turn to carbs, and you say it does nothing for you. And I would argue it probably does. It's maybe just